It was wintertime, and Christmas was approaching. I was 25 years old, and I was going to meet up with some of my friends who lived on the other side of the city. It was a 4-hour drive from my place, so I decided to take my own car instead of a local cab. It was my first time going alone on such a long drive, and I felt nervous, but excited. At midday, I packed my bags, threw them in the trunk, and went off to meet my friends. It was a cold day, but the roads were clear. I didn't see much traffic as it was the holidays, and people would rather spend time with their families and friends indoors and stay off the roads. Now, I'm not the type of person to go straight to my friend's house. I like to take my time. I'm a social media freak, and I enjoy posting pictures pretty much all the time. So I found the journey an excellent excuse to post some extra pictures. The road I was taking had beautiful scenery, and the place where my friends lived was even more magical. I stopped a lot during my ride to take pictures. I was having a great time by myself. Well, that was until the weather suddenly changed. It was around 6 p.m., and I was still driving. I still had a long way ahead of me. And that's when it started to snow. Not just a dusting of snow, it was thick and heavy. After 15 minutes or so, the roads were already covered with a few feet of snow. I felt anxious since it was getting dark and I wasn't even halfway through the drive. My car slowed down, and I had to force it to run on the empty roads. The heavy snow didn't stop. I decided that I would stop at the closest gas station I could find, but unfortunately, I couldn't find one for a while. An hour later, I finally saw some lights shining from the distance. It was a gas station. I pressed the accelerator, rushed to the station, parked my car, and went inside quickly. Just as I entered, a strong snowstorm started. The gas station had a little shop tucked away with some chairs to sit on. The guy at the counter was an ordinary fellow. He didn't really talk much. He only asked me where I was going in such harsh weather. After that, I bought some chips and drinks and sat down in the furthest chair from him. It was night now. I sat, munched on my food, and scrolled through an Instagram. Then, suddenly, the shop's door opened. I looked up, and a very weird-looking man entered. He had long, greasy hair, was wearing a long coat, and had a very grim expression. I saw him buy some cigarettes, and he sat down a few chairs away from me. He didn't look at me at all. At first, I ignored him, but then he started smoking. Since the shop was small and the smoke filled the air quickly, the shopkeeper told him to stop, but he didn't listen. He couldn't ask him to leave because of the storm, so he didn't say anything else. I, on the other hand, hated cigarettes. The weird guy was looking down, breathing very heavily as he smoked. It was as if he was breathing in my ears. So when he took out his 5th cigarette, I lost my temper and angrily told him to stop. He looked at me for a couple of minutes. His big eyes were red with anger, but then he smiled and stopped smoking. His smile was unnerving. I sat down again and distracted myself on my phone. Shortly afterwards, my friend called me, asking why I hadn't reached their place yet. I told him the whole story, and he said the storm would soon be over, and I shouldn't worry. When I hung up, I noticed the weird guy staring at my phone with deep interest. I was afraid that he was thinking of stealing it. But to my relief, after some time, he got up to leave. At the door, he stopped, looked back, and screamed loudly before running away, scaring the crap out of me and the shopkeeper. He didn't return after that. At 10:30 p.m., the storm ended, and I immediately left after thanking the shopkeeper. I went into my car, started it, and drove off. For some time, I drove in silence, but then I heard a noise. It sounded like heavy breathing. My heart rate shot up and my hands got all sweaty as the breathing sounded so familiar and so close. I looked through my rearview mirror and screamed. The weird guy from the shop was sitting in my back seat, smiling at me. I pressed the brakes very hard, got out of the car, and started running. I felt him running after me too, yelling at the top of his lungs. The road was empty, and I felt hopeless as I knew he was faster than me. I only looked back once to see him running like an unnatural being and holding a knife in his hand. I increased my pace, still wondering how on earth he got inside my car. I might have forgotten to lock the door when I first left to go to the gas station. But now, it was too late for regret. My life was at risk because some psychopath was after me. Then I saw some headlights at a distance. I started waving my hands like a maniac, screaming for them to stop. They did, and it turned out to be my friend. He had come to pick me up as he was worried since I was pretty late and thought something went wrong. I looked back, and I saw that guy was gone. I got inside my friend's car and told him everything. He called the cops, and they arrived shortly after. We all went to my car first and noticed some marks made by a knife in the back seat. The cops couldn't find the guy anywhere. After some investigation, they let us leave. I drove my car and my friend drove his car back to his place. The cops never found the guy. And to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if my friend didn't turn up that night.
My name is Dan. This happened 3 years ago. I moved out of my parents' house once I started making a steady paycheck. I'm a plumber, and one day I had to go to someone's house to fix some pipes. There was a married couple and their daughter living there. Their daughter was 22 at the time. She was 6 months older than me, and her name was Amanda. While I was working, she was talking to me, asking if I was single and stuff like that. And to be honest, she seemed pretty cute. We exchanged phone numbers and eventually started dating, and she even moved into my house. We were 3 months into our relationship, and stuff started to get out of hand. She was always getting mad and annoyed so easily. She always started arguments, and so on. This began to happen all of the time, even in public, which was incredibly embarrassing. One day I had enough, and I had to break up with her, and I told her to leave and never come back. Amanda was pretty pissed off when I said that. I just ignored her when she was packing her stuff. She finally left, or so I thought. After that day, she would always show up at my house, harass me, throw rocks at my window, and so on. I'd called the cops many times, but she was gone by the time they showed up. About a month later, when I came home from working, I would find her in her house, yelling at me to come back, or I'd find writing on my walls that would say, "Come back, or I'll kill you." The writing eventually went from pencil to marker, and then her own fucking blood. And Jess, I'm being serious when I said blood. That bitch carved my name a bunch of times into her arms and legs. She only got into my house because I forgot to take the house key back from her at the time. In hindsight, I'm such an idiot, I know. That psycho knew where my parents lived and showed up to their house during the night. My mom almost had a heart attack when she woke up to the sound of a knife being tapped on the window glass. When she woke up, she saw Amanda standing there, staring at her while psychotically smiling at her. Amanda did a lot, which really pissed me off, so one night, I decided to stay overnight at my parents' house. It was about 2 in the morning when I heard a tapping noise in the window next to me. I turned and saw Amanda staring right at me. Her eyes were wide open and red. She had bags under her eyes and a huge smile. I went outside and started yelling at her to stay away from me and my family, but she screamed at the top of her lungs and charged at me with a knife. I punched her right in the face, which knocked her out. I called the cops and made sure Amanda didn't wake up while they were arriving. The cops came quickly while Amanda was knocked out. They found my house key on her, and she was arrested and eventually sentenced for a long while. After Amanda was sentenced, my parents and I moved out of state because we'd like to stay as far away from Amanda as we possibly can, because she will eventually be released.
This happened to me at the beginning of this year, just after I lost my husband to meningitis. I had moved in with my father and taken a job at a local hotel. It was a nice, cushy job that wasn't very stressful, and it was also nice to me in my grief-stricken state. The job was the night shift front desk manager position. So I was watching scary movies or listening to creepy podcasts that seemed to help keep me awake. My husband had never liked scary things like I did, so it was nice getting back to something that was mine. Being the night worker, I was always by myself during my shift. The hotel was new, so it wasn't creepy to be by myself, especially since there was always someone around as far as guests went, and on top of that, my boss was always a phone call away. I knew I'd have backup if needed. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I was in the back office behind the desk, watching the cameras and listening to a podcast while twirling a pen around, waiting for hours to tick away. The hotel was pretty empty, so I felt more alone than usual. I looked down at my phone as my podcast ended and went to pick another one when I noticed movement outside the building on the cameras. A guest was walking in. I hadn't seen a car pull in from the driveway camera, but I chalked it up to me just not paying attention and went to the desk. The man walked in and I quickly noticed his clothes were dirty, tattered, and that he had this odd smell to him. Metallic smelling. I shook off the weird feeling and looked up at his face before greeting him. And I noticed that his eyes weren't on me, but the wall behind, just above me. I followed his gaze, wondering what he could be looking at, but there wasn't anything there. I was confused, but thought maybe he was lost in thought. I greeted him again, but his gaze still remained on the wall. I was starting to get freaked out, but kept my cool and cleared my throat. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" I asked more firmly. Quickly, his eyes flicked down, and those eyes were wide and crazy looking. It startled me enough that I took a small step back. His previously blank expression grew into that of a crazed, wide smile. He was missing teeth, and the second his lips parted, I could smell his rotten breath. It made my stomach churn. Before I could open my mouth, I watched his eyes slowly creep up and down my body, as if he were undressing me with his eyes. Then his eyes moved to my hand, and his smile faded into a hate-filled glare. His eyes were on my wedding ring. Well, yes, I still wore it, as I wasn't ready to give it up yet. "What the heck is that?" he asked, his voice thick and gruff and full of anger. "My wedding ring, sir. I'm married," I said, thinking maybe he was drunk. His glare got worse as his eyes met mine again. "Married? You lying bitch! You never told me you were married! You lied to me!" "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm afraid that I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I was so scared at that moment, but tried desperately not to cry. He was still shouting at me. "So, you're kicking me out of my own home? You're a little hussy. I'm taking what's owed to me. Get over here." He reached across the counter to try and grab me, and I let out a scream, stumbled back, tripping over my long skirt. I crawled quickly for the office door as he rushed to the counter. He grabbed my shirt, tearing it down the back as I went to slam the door shut, and I slammed it on his hand, making him scream in pain as I heard the bones break. As he let me go, I managed to finally shut and lock it before going into my boss's office. And as I dialed 911, I could hear him screaming at the office door, kicking as hard as he could to get it open. The operator stayed on the phone with me until the cops arrived. It took 3 grown officers and a taser gun to take him down and get him in the car. When everything was safe, I was sat down for a statement, and my boss and father were called. As my father was getting me into his truck, I heard an officer say that the man was a highly wanted man from Florida who had escaped a psychiatric facility. After he escaped the facility, he went looking for young brunette girls who were heavyset like me, or rather like his late wife. He had killed her and cut out her eyes and breasts, and done the same to 2 other girls in Alabama, so I could only guess he planned to do the same to me. Thank God for strong deadbolts and all of the police officers.
Ah! What a pleasant way to begin my 3 a.m. shift at Mercy Hospital. The first thing I did as I sat down was cut my finger. It was a paper cut. And despite working at one of the largest hospitals in the state, I couldn't find a single band-aid laying around. I sucked on my index finger like a vampire while I scrambled my desk for that band-aid. I found one. Purple. I'm a hospital receptionist, and all that means is I greet visitors, make appointments, and look nice. Well, as nice as a 30-year-old man who hasn't slept in hours can look. That night, as we call it, it was just me and a few nurses on the floor. Other than that, it was ghost quiet, except for the heavy, heavy rain. I sat back on the cheap recliner chair all receptionists get the honour of using. While adjusting my band-aid, I listened to the television mounted on the corner of the ceiling as it broadcasted a seemingly important message.
Authorities say the woman was last seen on Cedar Avenue.
I looked up to see if the television was showing any images of this strange woman. None. It was yet another crazy person with no name and no face who we were supposed to look out for. Not creepy at all.
Authorities also say the woman was reportedly walking around and asking people very, very bizarre questions.
I focused back on my desk and continued working, but I still listened as the news anchor went on and on. She continued.
The following statement was issued by an unidentified government official.
Listen carefully, folks. Whatever she asks you, answer no. Do not, under any circumstances, answer yes.
Officials won't comment further as to why, citing security clearance. Please are asking that you immediately call 911 if you deem anyone suspicious.
I thought that part of the coverage was quite odd, but I wasn't sure anything could scare me anymore. Working here at the hospital, I thought I'd seen it all. At the flash of the ruby red ambulance lights, I've seen people come in with severed arms, legs, fingers, people who somehow managed to scoop out their eyes, failed suicide attempts, and much, much more. You get used to it. My head was practically sunk into my desk as I filled out paperwork. That's when I heard something very subtle, initially. I heard it coming from the front doors, the entrance. The automatic doors opened and closed, slamming against each other, and sounding an obnoxiously loud thud each time. The very dim lighting I had surrounding my desk flickered incessantly. Hello? I called out, seated behind the safety of my desk. Only the whistling wind responded. Hello? I called out again. I felt obligated to check if someone was there, especially since it might have been someone who was injured and needed our attention. I reluctantly picked myself up from my chair and walked over to inspect. I nearly slipped and cracked my head open as the entrance floor was almost flooded from the rain. I noticed footsteps, wet shoe marks that seemed to come inside the hospital and then back out. I stood near the doors, poking my head outside, and looked. All I heard was the distant sounds of sirens and honking cars. The rain poured harder. The peace and quiet was disturbed within moments of me sitting back down. The automatic doors started again, opening and closing, slamming shut, and letting in more rain as they did. But this time, I heard gentle footsteps make their way towards me, tapping closer and closer. Someone slowly emerged from the darkness between the entrance and front desk. A woman with drenched black hair approached, wearing a dark brown raincoat and a pair of boots that were too large for her toothpick legs. Her face was inundated with wrinkles and wet makeup, her black eyeshadow smudged. Despite the heavy rain outside, she didn't seem to have bothered wearing her hoodie. Hello, how can I help you, ma'am? She didn't respond. She looked around, scanning and observing an unimpressive hospital. Is there something I can help you with? Still nothing. We engaged in a brief stare down, which she won. I looked down and pretended to gather important paperwork. Are you here to visit someone? Then finally, she responded, without talking. She simply nodded and then took a few steps forward, her hands hanging down her side. Her posture was unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Okay, for now I need you to sign here, then we'll have to wait a few hours for visiting time to begin, I said, pushing forward a sheet of paper and a pen. She raised her arm to sign and then abruptly stopped. She seemed startled by something on the desk. She looked at me, tilted her head and, with a smile that was as wide as her eyes, said,
"Would you please move that for me?"
I was confused at first, and then she pointed at it with her index finger, as drops of rainwater tapped against my desk while her arm hovered over it. I took the little crucifix we had at the front desk and put it in a drawer. The woman proceeded as if she was going to finally sign the paper and then stop before writing anything. She dropped the pen on the ground and stood there again, staring at me. She asked me a question.
"Do you reject the Trinity?"
"I'm sorry?" I replied. For a few more uncomfortable moments, the woman stood there, like an ancient statue. I had no idea what she meant by the question. "Ma'am, who exactly are you here to see? Family? Friend? What's your relationship with the patient?" Before I could finish talking midway through my question, the woman turned around and walked out the door, still smiling and her eyes as wide as I'd ever seen on a person. I went back to work and tried to move on, but her creepy mannerisms were trapped in my mind throughout the night. At around 4 AM I spotted one of the children in our hospital walking down the hall. "Nina, is that you?" I called out. All the kids in the hospital knew me. I was proudly considered one of the cooler employees. I let them break the rules. I brought them snacks upstairs and even told them scary stories, despite their predictable regret later on. The nurses would get angry with me every time I held one of my scary story nights. They always had a bunch of bed sheets to change the next morning. I only did these things for the kids when I wasn't busy, when it was a quiet night, and this was one of those uneventful nights, which of course was a good thing. Anyway, it was very odd to see Nina awake at that time, walking down those shadowy halls. She was absolutely terrified of the dark, and yet there she was. "Nina, is that you?" I squinted my eyes as I walked towards her.
"Sorry, Matt.
She began.
I don't want to be there anymore."
She had dragged her blue blanket along with her, which was her way of gesturing to us that she wanted to move to another room. "The other kids bothering you again?" I asked. I took hold of her hand and began walking her back to the elevator.
Matt, please, don't make me go back up there. I don't like the new nurse.
I stopped walking. What? I said, kneeling to Nina's level.
She keeps asking us the same question over and over. I said no so many times. I keep telling her no, but everyone else kept laughing with her and saying yes to her. Please, I don't want to go back up.
Nina's words immediately played flashbacks inside my tired, overworked mind. Something about a strange woman going around and asking even stranger questions. I didn't pay enough attention to that broadcast to notice the woman, but even if I had, I thought she had left the hospital. I ditched the elevator and ran up a flight of daunting stairs, stomping against each step with all the force I could muster. I probably woke up all those sleeping employees. I was so loud. I opened the door to the children's room and couldn't believe my eyes. I checked each room, each one on each floor. I woke up my co-worker nurse and asked about the children. She couldn't find them either. We looked everywhere and put the hospital on lockdown. We set off all possible alarms and other emergency procedures. We didn't find them. All that was left behind were their clothes.
This happened a couple of years ago. One night, my mom decided to hang out with her friends at a casino, and my dad was at work. So my two older sisters and I were home by ourselves. My sisters were 14 and 15 at the time, and I was 11. After my mom left, it was pretty exciting to be home by ourselves. But an hour later, it got boring, so we decided to play a game. We ended up playing hide and seek. At that point, I was a bit scared because it was 11 p.m., almost midnight. But then I kind of brushed it off since I thought my dad would come home soon. I didn't want to admit that I was scared. Also, I don't want to be home alone, so I decided to play. Let's just play hide and seek in the backyard, I suggested, but she refused. There are no hiding spots back there. Let's go to the forest, my sister said. After my sister said that, shivers went down my spine. But anyway, we stepped into the forest that's nearby. Go count, my second older sister said to me. I decided that I had to be brave. My other sister gave me a blindfold. What is this for? I asked. Put it on and try to find us, my sister said. While my sisters used flashlights to find a place to hide, I put the blindfold on and then counted to 30. When it was time, I said, "Ready or not, here I come." After walking around, touching every tree I walked by, 10 minutes had already passed, and I still hadn't found my sisters. Even while I was walking on this trail, I could barely see anything, so I tripped on a twig and fell. My clothes got dirty and my knees started bleeding. But I had no choice. I got up and walked around some more. I came across a tree and knew I finally found something. It felt like a person. "Haha, found you," I said. I then heard my sisters walking by behind me, saying, "Hey, how did you not find us yet?" At that moment, I froze. I took off my blindfold slowly and saw an old man sitting there smiling at me while holding a knife. "Can't I play with y'all?" he asked, with a cracking voice. He wore a dirty shirt, and his hair seemed like he didn't shower for a long time. My sisters and I screamed and started running out of the forest as quickly as we could. While running, I looked back and noticed the man chasing after us while holding the knife, swinging it in the air. He was laughing like a mad person. I've never felt that kind of fear before. But after running for a while, the old man couldn't keep up. He stopped running, stared at us, and then he turned around and went back into the forest. We got closer to our house, and then we saw our dad pulling into the driveway. We ran to him and told him what just happened. He was shocked, so he called the police immediately. The police went to the forest and they searched those areas for a few hours. After a while, they found and arrested the old man. The next day, we learned that the old man killed 4 female children and dumped their bodies in the woods. All the local news stations were covering the incident. When I heard that, I felt sick to my stomach. I am glad that we are safe, But now I pray for the 4 souls of the children. May they rest in peace.
I have a sister who got married when she was 18. She had a daughter named Susie. Her husband was unemployed. She had to work 2 jobs to support herself, her daughter, and her husband. Every day, she left the house at 8 a.m., and she only returned around 8 p.m. every night. Around this time, Susie had an imaginary friend. She told my sister it was a little girl named Jessica. Susie would talk about her all the time. My sister even overheard her talking to Jessica. It creeped her out, and after a while, she told Susie she was forbidden to talk about the girl. We weren't allowed to mention Jessica when we came over to visit. One day, Susie told her mom, "Jessica is mad at you because you don't believe she's real. She comes to play with me when Daddy closes the closet door after you leave, and he lets us out before you come home." My sister had no idea this was happening. Her husband was supposed to be watching Susie during the day. Instead, he would lock her in the closet with a box of cereal and leave her there all day. When my sister discovered what was going on, she kicked her husband out. The poor little girl spent so much time all alone, locked in a closet, that she had conjured up an imaginary playmate for herself. My sister divorced her husband and got custody of Susie. She decided to move out of the house they were renting. When the moving van came, the old man who owned the house came over to help them. He was talking to my sister and said, "I was always worried about your little girl on those basement stairs. My granddaughter fell down those basement stairs and broke her neck. She died in front of the closet down there." When she heard that, my sister got the chills. "What was her name?" she asked. "It wasn't Jessica, was it?" The old man looked at her and said her name was Jessica. She was only 4 years old. She couldn't say it properly. "And how did you know that's how she said her name, Jessica? How did you know?" My sister was in denial. She told him she didn't know what he was talking about. She refused to talk about it, grabbed the last of her things, and left the house for good. Even today, we're still not allowed to talk about Susie and her imaginary friend, Jessica. My sister remarried a few years later, and Susie got a great new stepdad. But Susie, when we speak alone, she always brings up that little girl and what she looked like. And it still creeps me out to this day, because I don't really believe in that type of stuff with ghosts and paranormal, but there's no way that Susie could have known about that little girl. But who knows? Maybe they are real, and maybe not.
Every night, I hear my mother through the walls. But she never talks during the day, only at night. Like clockwork, she begins at midnight and abruptly stops at 6 a.m. I've heard everything, from harsh whispers, playful talking, cackling, and even screaming. Some of the things I hear her say frighten me. It's about dark and dreadful things. Whenever I enter her room to check on her, the silence is there. She just rocks in her chair. This is enough. I can't take it anymore. My mom has been suffering from seizures for the past few years, and they're getting worse. The doctor told me that she needed full-time care, so I volunteered. Even though she has always been estranged and I hadn't seen her in a decade, I knew she needed me. So I kinda thought it might be my last chance to stay with her. But it's gotten too much. She scares me. She doesn't even eat. I've tried and tried, but she doesn't open her mouth. I've tried to get her out of her bedroom, or at least out of her chair, but she gets aggressive. So whenever she needs a bath, I bathe her right where she sits. She just rocks in her chair, mindlessly smiling at her closet. She does this all day. I have no idea what I have to do next. I'm about to go insane. I can handle caring for her during the day, but at night I can't anymore. So I finally went to the doctor for some help. I told him that she's been keeping me up at night with her whispering and talking. And I also told him that it's getting too much and she's starting to scare me. But his facial expression while looking towards me was weird. He stared at me like he didn't understand what I was talking about. And what the doctor said next scared me even more. "Well, I think you had a bad dream. Your mother bit her tongue off a few years ago. She can't talk at all." It happened when I was around 11 years old. One day, I was at my friend Kenzie's house. My other friend Emma joined us too. It was a lazy weekend, so we decided to kill some time by baking cookies and doing other things. We all gathered in Kenzie's room and did our geometry homework, which was the main reason we were all there. But soon after, we got bored doing it since we were young teenage girls. So we jumped on the bed, watched YouTube and Netflix, and told each other scary stories. The one I'll never forget is Kenzie's story. She told me a story that kept me paranoid for the rest of my stay at the house. She told us the owner of the house was found murdered in this house, and she sometimes feels like someone lives in her closet. A few hours later, Kenzie's parents said that they were going to a party and wouldn't be back until 6 in the morning. Kenzie didn't want to spend the night with her grandma and little sister, so she suggested that we should have a sleepover. It sounded like a great idea, so we just called each of our parents, and it took a lot of convincing to have the sleepover. When we got permission, we all changed into Kenzie's pajamas, got in bed, and watched something scary. It was almost 8 p.m. Kenzie's room was so messy, it almost looked like a pig's pen, so we decided that we would record a time-lapse of us cleaning. We were in the middle of cleaning the room when the doorbell suddenly rang. It was our pizza delivery. We all forgot to turn the camera off and left to eat. We just sat in the living room, ate, and talked for a while. After we finished eating the pizza, we went back to her room. I realized that we left the camera on. But as I reached to grab my phone, I felt something. I was anxious, even though her room was very silent. So I told my friends to come closer. We all stood there and watched the video. As soon as we left, the window opened slowly. There was a man who came inside, and then he ran into the bathroom. We all froze, knowing that someone was in the bathroom, which was connected to this room, but tried not to make any noise. Then Kenzie told us that we should all leave this room, so we did just that. We went to her grandma's room with her little sister. We immediately locked the door, called the police, and Kenzie's parents. Thankfully, the police arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they arrived at the house, they went to Kenzie's room and found the man. Near the sink was a gun and a pocket knife, and they arrested him. It turns out that he was put in jail last week for raping young girls and then murdering them. But he escaped prison and tried to find another victim. I couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if I didn't look at the footage on my camera. To this day, I hate going to sleepovers. Now I'm 16, and I heard that the man escaped again after killing the security guards. I hope he's not looking for me or my friends. This story takes place in South Africa, my home country. It happened last year during July, right after I turned 18. I had a 3-week holiday before I had to go back to school, and my sister decided to take me and a few friends to KwaZulu-Natal for a trip to a mountain range. It was me, my sister called Kate, and my 3 friends, Ashley, May, and Hannah. The last place we visited before we went to the cold mountain range was called Izandalwana, where the Shaka Zulu army fought Britain with many fatalities. We got to the place at around midnight since there was no security, so we decided to explore the grounds and look at the thousands of graves placed around the land. It wasn't until after I asked to give it a rest and find a place to stay for the night that my sister pulled a box out of her bag. It was the infamous Ouija board. We used to believe in the paranormal side of the world, so all 5 of us decided to play. I mean, it was such a perfect place to do it. So we sat down by one of the bigger graves and started playing. But the board wasn't really doing anything until my sister lost her temper and took her fingers off. The key started moving around in short circles before going over the letters and spelling out RUNTHEAREHERE. Run. They are here. At first, we were all kind of laughing. We weren't really scared because we'd had a crap ton of alcohol before playing the game and thought it was one of the girls doing it. However, all of a sudden, Ashley stood up, cried out in pain, and she claimed something was stabbing her. "Help! Help me!" she screamed, so we immediately stopped playing and went to help her. When she lifted up her shirt, we could see a long and deep scratch that went from where her heart is down to her stomach. We were all shocked, so we left the place in a hurry since the nearest clinic was over an hour away. When we arrived, our situation only got worse, considering we were a group of white girls who only knew how to speak English and a bit of Dutch, while everyone inside of the clinic was a Zulu native and didn't know any English. We couldn't get my friend any help, since neither we nor the nurses understood each other until we lifted up my friend's shirt to show them the wound. We felt so stuffy, and eventually one nurse sterilized her and bandaged her up. However, surprisingly, the next morning when we woke up inside of my sister's van, she was no longer wounded, and it was as if the event didn't even happen. Someone later told us that it might be a Zulu trademark to cut their enemies' hearts from their gut in respect of the body they had killed, preparing them for the afterlife. But who knows? Now, over a year later, none of us truly know what happened. I go to university, and they are still my only friends. The memory becomes more and more distant over time, and I sometimes believe that we all just hallucinated. But the one thing for sure is that I will never, ever touch the Ouija board again.
This happened to me last summer. My best friend and I went to Ibiza for a week. Once we checked into our hotel on the first day, we threw our bags in our room and drove our rented car to the nearest supermarket. On our way there, we talked about the hotel, which was located in the very old suburban part of the city. It was really dirty. It just had an overall weird vibe to it. My friend was really bummed out about it, but we agreed that it wasn't going to ruin our excitement for this trip. Later that night, around 3 a.m., after coming back from a club to the area where we stayed, we couldn't find our hotel. We were completely drunk and probably walked around the streets in circles. My friend laughed a lot, stopped, and then pointed at a tall garden fence. Through it, we saw the hotel building. It was right behind the garden, so without putting much thought into it, we tried to climb over the fence. My friend managed to succeed, but I fell and hurt my right leg quite a bit. He helped me up, and we stood in the middle of a bunch of green bushes. "What the?" my friend murmured all of a sudden. I looked up, and there were a bunch of tombstones. We were standing right between two walls, and at the end of the walls there was a small chapel. The door was wide open, and from a distance, we could see that it was full of lit-up candles. I was about to ask my friend why the lights were on, but that drunk idiot suddenly started to laugh and walked toward the chapel with big, awkward steps. Due to my injured leg, I couldn't really catch up with him. I almost felt like puking, so I looked down for a moment, and when I looked up again, he was standing inside the chapel. I took a few more steps and stopped as I saw his face look completely gray. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he gave me no response. Suddenly, he raised his hand and signaled that I should back off and be quiet. He leaned his face a bit forward, as if he was trying to see something in the room. At that point, I was really scared, so I just took as many steps back as I could while still looking at him. Then, I heard something. The sound of footsteps, maybe 4 or 5 people, was directly in front of me. He immediately turned around and started to sprint as fast as he possibly could while yelling, "Run! Run! Go!" I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer, and whoever was chasing me was yelling some words in Latin. My friend caught up to me just as I was about to climb the fence. He helped me out and gave me a push forward. The footsteps were still right behind us. However, when we hit the ground on the other side of the fence and looked back between the bars into the green bushes, there was no one to be seen, no one to be heard. As frightened as we were, we glanced in every direction, looking for them, but there was nothing. We then got back on our feet and eventually went back to the hotel. Our legs were shivering. My friend entered the lobby first, and as I was just about to enter too, I looked back at the street we just came from and saw 5 figures standing in the darkness. They wore long black clothes and all stared directly at me. I got scared, so I immediately got in and went up to my room. Our hotel room was located on the 5th floor, so I looked down the window into the streets, but I couldn't see any of the figures. I remained extremely paranoid during the rest of our stay, but we never encountered anything similar. Even to this day, we haven't talked about the incident. This happened about 4 years ago, in December of 2015. Me and 5 of my friends have our own business editing photos and videos for social media content creators. And because of this, we tend to have a lot of spare time on our hands. We used to go on road trips to a local lake that has a few nice spots to camp at, and a ski resort. We usually went there on our days off. One week, the 6 of us finished all of our projects early, so we had a few days off. We decided to drive to the lake. I won't be using their real names for obvious reasons, so I'll call them Kevin, Steven, Brittany, Katie, and Josh. Katie and Brittany rode in Katie's old sports car, and Steven and I rode on our motorcycles. Usually, Kevin and Josh took Steven's Jeep. But on this trip, Josh had just bought a new Sprinter van, which the previous owner had converted into a 2-person camper, so Kevin decided to ride with Josh. When we arrived, we skied, had some really delicious camping food, and listened to Josh brag about his new van. It was a pretty normal trip. On the last day, we all packed up to head home. About 2 hours into the trip back home, we were a little hungry, so we stopped at a gas station to grab some snacks. We all parked our vehicles outside and went into the gas station together, which was kind of foolish. We were in there maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and the car's door was left open the whole time. When we came outside, we had a huge shock waiting for us. Josh's van was gone. There was a huge dent on the side of Katie's car and another dent on the side of an old truck in the parking lot, which I assumed belonged to an employee. We were so panicked at that moment, so we immediately called the police. But since we were a little off the grid, the police took 15 minutes to arrive, and by then, we knew the chances of them being able to find Josh's van was slim to none. The scariest thing about it was that Kevin brought his work laptop on the trip, and I knew that Kevin didn't have a password set up on it. We waited for another 2 or so hours while the police searched the area, but they couldn't find anything. They told us to go home, and they would contact us if they found the stolen van. Kevin and Josh rode with the girls in Katie's car, while Steven and I rode our motorcycles, following them very closely. We didn't stop once during the remaining 3-hour trip home. Fast forward 2 or 3 weeks later, we received a frantic call from Josh. He said that the police contacted him and that the van had been found. All 6 of us showed up to see the van, and the van had somehow been rolled on its side and was left in a ditch near the highway, about an hour from where it had been stolen. Once they got it out of the ditch and flipped it upright, the police let us look inside to see if we could salvage any personal items. Sure enough, Kevin's laptop was gone, along with a set of kitchen knives that Josh had used for making kebabs. The most disturbing thing, though, was that once we got the busted driver's side door open, we saw that both seats were stained a deep dark red in multiple places, and the dashboard had slash marks all over it. At that point, we were really afraid of the van. Josh let the police take the van for further inspection, but we never heard what happened to it, or who the blood belonged to. My name is Louis, and I live in Switzerland. This story happened 5 years ago during the winter holidays. It was an icy cold day and the snow was falling continuously, so we had to warm the house all day long with the firewood, putting it into the fireplace. My dad told us all the time that we should take care of the firewood. However, for the next days, we didn't do anything but just played Nintendo. Eventually, we noticed late around 9 p.m. that we had run out of wood. Dad got angry, so as a punishment, he sent me and my older sister to the local lumberjack who was famous in the area. His shop was located 1.5 kilometers away from our house. He was a really tall guy with a long beard and wore a black and white lumberjack shirt as a classic lumberjack. Anyway, at first he seemed very talkative. We ordered 2 bags full of wood, which were about 50 kilograms. He said, "Okay, hold on. It'll take about 15 minutes to cut and wrap everything." All of a sudden, my sister had to go to the restroom. He said that he would let her know where the toilet is, so she followed him. I was waiting for about 15 minutes, and then I noticed the place was silent. I saw neither my sister nor the man. I called my sister's name, but there was no answer. Then I got a message from my dad that if we bought the wood, then we should come home immediately. According to the local news, the police are looking for a serial killer in the village 50 kilometers from here. Dad also attached a picture, and unfortunately, he looked very similar to the lumberjack. My heart dropped. I wanted to scream, but then he came with the bag of wood suddenly. He was smiling, but I could feel that something was weird. He looked joyful. "Please ask me where's your sister," he said and winked at me. "She's certainly not far away from you." Then I noticed the red stains on his shirt. I nervously opened a wood sack, and the pink hair clip of my sister came out. I was full of anger. I grabbed the wooden bag with all my strength and hit the man. He screamed and fell on the floor, and I pulled out my pocket knife and stabbed him. 2 or 3, many times. Suddenly, I heard a loud scream out of nowhere. "Stop, Louis!" It was my sister. "That was a prank!" She was crying. I couldn't think straight. My head was all messed up. What have I done? I killed the wrong guy. I dropped the knife and stared at his cold body. But then I recognized that I had no time. I knew that we had to get rid of this body quickly while we were still alone in the shop without employees or customers. So I quickly looked around and found a hidden room, which was locked. We kicked the door and pushed him inside. And we were about to turn on the light in the room to find a cover, but then what I found was a huge shock. The room was full of people who had been cut in several pieces, and the floor was covered with blood. The lumberjack was the real serial killer. We were so terrified that we quickly covered him with some fabric and then ran out of the shop. We ran home as fast as we could. My dad asked us what happened, but we couldn't tell our parents anything. Since that day, we always made sure that we keep enough wood before the heavy snow. And I'm still wondering if the police found all the bodies at that shop.
My name is Melanie. This happened when I was 6 years old. In 1989, I lived in San Bernardino, California. One night, after watching my favorite TV show, I decided to sleep with my mom. I used to sleep alone, but somehow I went to her bed and she smiled at me. While I was sleeping with her, I had a dream that I was at a park. It was sunny, and there were a lot of big trees around. I was in the car, and my mom was standing on the corner of the sidewalk. I struggled to open the door, but it didn't open at all. As I was pounding on the back of the car window, crying for her to help me, she just stood there, smiling and waving to me. Then I woke up, crying hysterically. Mom also woke up and rubbed my back, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to repeat the horrible dream. Nothing. I told her and fell back asleep without any more bad dreams that night. After a year, we moved to Las Vegas, and I was getting ready to turn 7 in a couple of weeks. My older brother, sister, and I went to the airport to visit my aunt who lives in Washington for a while. After finishing check-in, we went through security and got ready to board the plane. When I looked back at my mom, she was smiling and waving at me. It was the same way as in my dream. I couldn't dismiss the weird feeling during the flight. But despite the anxiety, we eventually arrived at my aunt's house peacefully. We were about to have a big party since my birthday was coming. And on my birthday, my mom called to greet me and said that she loves me. That was the last time I ever heard her speak. Everything was alright. I was so happy at the time. I was waiting for my mom to come over here and spend time with us. A few days later, my uncle told us to sit down in the living room, as he had something very important to tell us. I noticed that my older sister was sitting in the corner chair and was crying quietly. He proceeded to tell us that my mother was no longer with us. At first, I couldn't understand what he was saying. He then told us that she died from a car accident. There was nothing more devastating than that day. Everybody in the living room was crying with such piercing sadness. Now I've grown up, but I still have dreams of my mom smiling and waving at me. I hope this story urges whoever is watching this video to cherish your loved ones, because it could be the last day you see or speak to them. My name is Gabby, and this story is my true experience. When I was 11 years old, my family and I moved to a big house in a tiny town. Our new house was located at the highest point, which was at the end of the town. When we bought the house, the owner explained to us that his wife had just passed away due to cancer, and that the house was very precious to her, so she never wanted to sell it. Still, the owner said the house was too big and lonely for him, since all their kids were grown up and already moved to other cities. However, during the final part of the deal, he suddenly changed his mind and didn't want to sell the house. But it was too late. The owner stormed out of the office saying that it was his house and that we were going to regret it. Anyway, this was during the time my dad was sent overseas because he was in the military. So my mom, my older brother, and I had to live by ourselves for 6 months. During that time, we had really weird experiences. Sometimes we would wake up to the sound of a goat in our backyard. It would last the whole night. The next morning, we talked to the neighbors and asked if one of them had goats, but none of them did. So at first, we just decided to ignore the issue and leave it alone. Now, just for your information, our house design was kind of odd. Downstairs, we had my room, my brother's room, my soon-to-be-born sister's room, and a weird wide walkway that led to the backyard. And upstairs, we had a kitchen, living room, and my parents' room. The downstairs was underground, and the upstairs was technically the first floor. Anyway, one night, I decided to sleep with my mom, so I went upstairs with my brother. Later that night, we heard a sharp scream coming from downstairs. It sounded like it was my dad's voice screaming for help. He was calling all of our names. My mom rushed out of the room and was ready to run downstairs. All of a sudden, she stopped at the top of the staircase and looked at us with a weird expression on her face. "But your dad is still in Colombia. How could he?" And the next thing I saw was my mom abruptly falling down the stairs. That moment was so horrible. It was like someone pushed her backwards before she was able to resist. My brother called the police and I ran down the stairs to check my mom and see if she was okay. We struggled to bring her up the stairs, but we managed to make it to her room. When the police and ambulance arrived, they took my mom to a hospital and left 2 officers with us that night. I was crying the entire night, and we were so afraid. Due to falling down the stairs, Mom was injured, and unfortunately, we lost our new family member. The most chilling part was that they found large handprints on my mom's back, as if she was pushed by someone. This led to an investigation, but they had to leave the case open because no one was found in our house, other than the 3 of us. We all suffered and went through a hard time that year, especially my mom. She slid into depression. When she recovered, we moved the following year. However, more things happened throughout the year, but not as bad as the previous one. Just footsteps, broken plates, or similar stuff to that. We put that house on the market when we left, but no one has contacted us. One thing is for certain. I hope that we never have to go back to that creepy house again. I really, really don't want to go back.
I was 12 years old when this happened. My grandmother just got home from the hospital because she had a stroke. She couldn't go up to the 2nd floor of our house, in which her room was located. So my uncle, my little brother, and I decided that we were going to sleep in her room for a while. Before this day happened, my aunt bought a new air conditioner, so the old one would be removed. And of course, there was a hole in the wall for the air conditioner. I covered the hole with some kind of small box before working on the wall, so the air wouldn't come in. Anyway, back to the situation. My uncle and I were playing a mobile game at 3 a.m. when this happened. We played for about an hour or so until my little brother had fallen asleep. While I was paying attention, I suddenly heard a small scratching sound coming from the hole on the wall where I covered it with a box. Its sound was like someone trying to remove it with something. However, I just ignored it at first, because I thought it might be a cat trying to remove the cover. After 5 minutes, my uncle heard the sound and he whispered in my ear saying, "Did you hear that sound?" I said, "Yeah, I heard it too, but maybe it's just a cat. Forget about it." After that, we had forgotten about the sound and we just played again, until that moment. All of a sudden, my uncle quickly put down his cell phone and started to search with the flashlight. "What's wrong?" I asked him, but he pointed his finger on his mouth and pointed it to the window. It was quiet outside. "That's weird. I heard someone's footsteps." He talked to me sitting back next to me. I tried to say that it's nothing, but this time I heard those footsteps. Someone was outside walking around with a creaking sound. So we eventually decided to look for it, opening the box cover. But before we could get closer, my little brother began to scream. We were shocked by that, but then we just laughed, thinking our reaction was silly. I talked to my little brother and asked him what happened. He said that he had a nightmare. We laughed again, much bigger this time. Bump! We abruptly froze when we heard loud footsteps from a roof away from us. My heart dropped. What was it? My uncle said with an anxious voice. We then stayed away from the wall and started panicking. I started to think that it might be a thief who was trying to enter our house. What if he would try to kill us? How are we going to stop him? What should I do? However, despite all my worries, nothing happened after that. There were no footsteps anymore, but my uncle and I had to stay up until the next morning, shivering together. A few days later, my grandpa covered the wall with cement, and that day we were watching the local news and we heard that one of our neighbors, who lived right next to us, had been murdered. They also reported that the suspect has not been found, so the cops were struggling to arrest him. We just couldn't believe the news. We just watched the news with our mouth open. That moment became the worst nightmare of my whole life. What if I dared to try to remove that small box to see outside on that day? When I was 14 years old, we traveled to Jeddah for a few days. On our way back, it was just past midnight, and there were almost no cars around on both sides of the highway. My mom, dad, and I were chatting and laughing at each other. However, we just ran out of topics soon, and I decided to lie down in the back seat. At that moment, I heard a loud bang and passed out for a few seconds. When I got my senses back, I tried to sit up, but the car felt like a roller coaster, so I struggled a little. When I finally sat up, I grabbed the shoulders of both the driver and passenger seats. And then, looking out through my window, I realized that the car was on mid-air floating. When the car dropped, the front bumper dismantled and slid past the right windows of the car. What makes the matter worse, our car did not stop for us. It just started to run at a very high speed, and my dad and I freaked out due to the situation. My mom was insisting him to stop the car as soon as possible. I could see that he was trying, but the car wouldn't stop. Fortunately, we stopped at the fast lane of the highway, and there was a gas station on the other side of the road. We rushed out of the car and realized that our front left tire burst, and I could see that there was still no cars anywhere. The road was totally empty. My dad was bleeding from his nose injury due to his first hit on the steering wheel when the tire burst. When my mom went back to check to see if he was all right, I suddenly started to have an eerie feeling. At that very moment, I could feel that part of the illumination from the gas station seemed to get dimmer. Lifting my head, I scrutinized in the woods behind the gas station. And then, two dark, gigantic figures were standing there and staring at us. I thought I was hallucinating, but those figures were literally standing there. Although I couldn't see their faces, I could surely see the silhouettes and those piercing eyes. Also, their sizes were absolutely abnormal. I stood there in fear. I couldn't even think of calling out my mom, saying, "Look over there." Then those two figures slowly walked away to the woods and disappeared. After those things walked away into the dark, the brightness of the gas station seemed to be back to normal again. And then, the cars on the road started to pass on both sides of the highway. It was like a moment of nightmare. We finally called the police, and not long after, 3 police cars arrived. At first, the cops didn't seem to believe us when we reported our situation. But anyway, we were taken to the hospital and given treatment. The next day, a detective came to speak with us, saying that this part of the highway was known as a haunted road, and a lot of bizarre accidents have occurred, literally. The local government tried to investigate what was the reason, but it has never been solved until now. Since that day, my family never went on that highway. And a few years later, that highway was shut down due to the rising number of fatalities.
This happened to me a couple of years ago. My family and I moved to a new house. It was quite old, and it had been sitting empty for at least 15 years before my family decided to buy it. At first, I was just happy that we had a new house, but after that, I had some weird experiences. My room was right across the bathroom, and at night, I would hear strange noises coming from it. Actually, if you listened more carefully, it sounded like it was coming from the walls. But when I finally got enough courage to walk towards it, the noises always stopped. Not much later, I got used to the sound and eventually stopped being scared of it. But that wasn't a problem compared to other things. My stuff started to go missing, like my clothes, underwear, and even one of my pillows. Sometimes I yelled at my little sister, since she often came into my room. I thought that she probably stole my stuff, but whenever I got mad at her, she said, "Why would I take your underwear? I'm not a thief." Eventually, I couldn't find my stuff. Even worse, our food also went missing, little by little. My family and I felt uneasy. One night, I was laying in my bed about to go to sleep, and as I rolled over, I saw a figure in front of my door. That sent chills down my spine, so I rubbed my eyes and it was totally gone. I thought it was just my imagination, but after that, I started receiving little notes on my bedside table when I woke up. "Pretty, I see you," and other weird things were written on it. However, I figured that my sister was trying to scare me, so I just ignored it. And that day became the most terrible memory of my entire life. One day, my dad and I were fixing up the bathroom. Because the entire house was pretty old, we were repairing the inside of the bathroom first. As we were tearing the tiles of the wall, Dad took the huge mirror off, and at that instant, I screamed. There was a little room behind the mirror, and there I found my stuff and even my underwear, along with empty food wrappers. We couldn't believe what we just saw, and Mom immediately called the police. They arrived pretty fast, and when they inspected that tiny room, they found out that there was a man who had been living in it for at least a couple of months. But he was not there, so the police promised that they would search for him outside. After that, we demolished the room, and since I turned 18 years old, I moved to my college nearby and got my own apartment. Sometimes I go back to my hometown to visit my parents, but never spend the night. I know that the man was still never caught, and I'm always paranoid, wondering if he's still hiding somewhere in our house.
It was Friday the 13th. I was walking home from my friend's house. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 5 minutes. As I got to my door, I realized I didn't bring my keys when I left my house. I took my cell phone out from my pocket to check the time, and it was 7:30 p.m. My parents usually don't get back home from work until 8:45 p.m., so I decided to walk to my grandparents' house, which is only about a 10-minute walk. As I was walking down the street, I saw a shadow behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. My heart started racing, and I started to speed up. Then I saw the shadow again, following. I turned around again. Nobody was there. I was kind of scared at that time, but thankfully I was getting closer to my grandparents' house. I texted my grandma and told her to wait outside the door for me, and she replied with an okay. When I turned the corner, I could see the house and my grandma standing there. I started to feel calm again, like nothing was going to happen to me. But I was wrong. As I was about to cross the road to get to my grandma, I was suddenly pulled into an alleyway. One hand covered over my mouth and another hand was around my body. With such an abrupt attack, I couldn't get my scream out. I looked down and I could see a very dark, black hand with long, pointy black nails. Lots of cuts and scratches were all over his hands. Its face was getting closer to mine, and it smelled like dead bodies. When I looked next to me, I could see a little part of its face. It was pale white with a tint of gray. I could tell that it was not from here. It was something that we should not know. Tears were flowing down my face. After being dragged through the alleyway, I was dropped onto the ground. When I moaned in pain, that creature stood over me, breathing into my face. Now I could clearly see its face. It had big black eyes, a big open smile with pointy white teeth, and a long red pointy nose. I closed my eyes, hoping it was just a dream. However, I felt their hand and nails were starting to dig into my neck, slowly and painfully. I struggled to breathe, but it was impossible. My vision was slowly blurring. And at that moment, someone put their hands on my shoulders. Another put their head on my right shoulder and started to whisper in my ear with a strange voice. "So, this is how you end up when you forget your key on Friday the 13th. Then the creature started laughing, and then everything went pitch black and silent. When I opened my eyes again, I heard a bunch of people shouting, "He's back! He's back!" I was lying in a hospital room, and all my family was standing next to me. I looked to the left of me, and there was a woman doing something next to a monitor. I asked her, "Excuse me, why am I here? What happened?" And she responded, "You were found in an alleyway near your grandma's house with scratches and cuts on your neck. As soon as your grandma saw you being pulled into the alley, she immediately ran after you. She found you laying there as pale as paper, with your phone in your hand and blood running from your neck onto the ground. So she called 911, and now you're here." Looking her straight in the eye, I was immobilized with terror. I couldn't believe what she was saying, because I couldn't remember what happened to me. And then, when I looked to the right of me on the bedside table, there it was. I could see my house key.
My name is Caitlin. This incident happened when I was 14 years old, and I will never forget this memory. One day, I was at home alone at my house. My mom was still at the office late at night, and my two siblings were at my grandparents' house, which was kind of far away from my home. At first, I was just enjoying my time alone, watching Netflix and doing some fun stuff. However, after a while, I got pretty bored, so I decided to invite some of my friends over. I asked my mom for permission and then called my friends to invite them over. A few moments later, while I was waiting for them, I heard a loud bang upstairs. I was sure that there was no one else upstairs. So I stood up and looked up the stairs with an anxious look on my face. When I was near the stairs, I could see that one of my dolls had fallen. I picked it up, and when I straightened my back, something caught my attention. A little girl was standing upstairs. Well, I could feel that she was staring at me, even though I couldn't see her face clearly due to the darkness. I was terrified, and then someone rang the doorbell. I ran to see who it was, and luckily, my friends had arrived. Thank God, it was a moment of relief that my friends came over at the right time. Soon, I got my mind off of the girl I saw. We sat down in the living room and had fun talking with each other. An hour later, one of my friends suggested that we should take some pictures together, so we gathered around one another. We took several selfies while laughing and chatting. Later, as we scrolled through the pictures, we found something. There was a little girl standing behind our couch. What made us even more terrified was the fact that she had no face. I mean, her face was just an empty darkness. No eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Being terrified, I told Cassie to delete that picture right away. However, she said that something was wrong with her cell phone. I snatched the phone out of her hands and tried to delete it. But no matter what we tried, we couldn't delete the picture. Then we heard loud thumps. It sounded like someone's footsteps were coming from upstairs, and our light was flickering on and off at the same time. We thought that we couldn't stay inside anymore, so we rushed outside in a hurry. One of my friends, Christina, suddenly pointed at my bedroom window and said that there was someone in there. I raised my eyes up and followed her finger, and there she was. It was the same faceless girl we had seen in the picture. My friends and I screamed. I called my mom and explained everything. My mom couldn't believe what I told her, so she made me calm down and said that she would be home in 5 minutes. After she arrived home, she searched the entire house, but she couldn't find any trace of the girl. I hoped that it was just our imaginations. However, we soon decided to move out of the house because I kept seeing the girl after that incident. We finally moved, and from then on, my mom never wanted me to be home alone, so I always stayed with my siblings. I still have no clue why the girl haunted me, but I think it was because she wanted us to get out of the house. Well, I'm just glad that I don't see that girl in my new house.
One evening, I was looking for an internet cafe because I needed to send a few emails. I spotted one in an old building. The sign said it was on the 6th floor. When I walked through the entrance, there was a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, I stepped inside. In a lot of Asian countries, many buildings do not have a 4th floor. The number 4 is considered bad luck because the word 4 sounds almost the same as the word for death. When it stopped and the doors opened, I was about to step out when I realized that something was wrong. The hallway was in total darkness. By the light emanting from the elevator, I could make out a random piece of furniture covered with white cloth. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought I might have gotten off on the wrong floor, so I checked the buttons, but none of them were lit up. There was nothing to indicate which floor I was on. Just then, I noticed something moving at the end of the darkened hallway. I couldn't quite make out what it was, but it looked like a person dressed in some type of gown. The figure was moving slowly down the hallway towards the elevator. It creeped me out, and in a panic, I started pressing the closed door button. All of a sudden, the light in the elevator flickered and turned off. I was plunged into the pitch darkness. I was so freaked out I almost wet myself. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the lights flickered back on. The doors closed. The elevator jolted back to life and began to ascend again. I breathed a sigh of relief. When the doors opened this time, I was at the internet cafe. I went over to the counter and told the girl who worked there and what had happened. As she listened, her face grew pale. She said that some of the customers and a few of her co-workers had experienced the same thing. She had never experienced anything herself, but she told me about the history of the building. Apparently, the 4th floor had been a hair salon at one time. It was prospering and doing pretty good until one of the women who worked there killed herself in the salon. Nobody knew the reason why. The salon continued to operate, but they were plagued by weird and inexplainable events. Sometimes when customers were having their hair washed, the water would turn as red as blood. Other people claimed that when they looked in the mirror, they would catch glimpses of a ghostly figure standing behind them. When they turned around, there would be no one there. Because of these events, the salon developed a bad reputation and began to lose customers. Eventually, they were forced to close down. The building's owner tried to rent the 4th floor out to other businesses, but when they found out what had happened, nobody would take it. Finally, the owner reduced the price to nearly nothing, and it was rented by a businessman who planned to open a stationery supply store. However, when they tried to do some renovations on the floor, there was a series of mysterious accidents. The workmen's tools would sometimes disappear, only to be found in strange places. A large mirror suddenly shattered when nobody was near it, and the workman had his hand crushed when the elevator closed unexpectedly. Eventually, the workmen were so spooked that they refused to continue. The building's owner gave up trying to rent the 4th floor out and just shut it down. He had the buttons in the elevator replaced, and it was reprogrammed that nobody could go on the 4th floor. At least that's what's supposed to happen. For some reason, when people took the elevator, it would sometimes stop on the 4th floor, and when the doors opened, some people would see a figure coming toward them in the darkness. I honestly still don't know what that was. I'm someone who goes on the deep and dark web constantly. It's not what people think, where it's evil and overpopulated with crazy people. That's only a small percentage of the dark web. Years ago, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I put her personal information on a forum, and soon after that, she disappeared. It's been a while since that happened, and I've ran into people that have disrespected me since. I'm not an intimidating guy, nor do I look intimidating, nor do I ever have physical or verbal conflicts. I always think to myself that these people don't know what could happen to them. I work at a fast food restaurant, and at the time of this story, my manager was really on my case about everything. I would be late, mess up orders, have an attitude with customers, and some other stuff I could name, but it's so much. I understood that I was messing up, but the tone that this guy would talk to me embarrassed me in front of my coworkers, and sometimes in front of customers. One day, though, that was the last straw. So one day I walked into work, 5 minutes before I was due to clock in, and my manager out loud said that the window liquor is finally on time, in front of customers and my coworkers. Everyone laughed at me. During my whole shift that night, he would direct smart comments toward me, while still yelling at me for everything that I did wrong. I made up my mind. I was going to find that forum and give his information. On my walk home, I was going back and forth with myself about whether to do it or not. By the time I made it home, I made up my mind. I didn't shower nor did I change clothes. I went straight to my laptop and I searched. I possibly clicked maybe 100 links because on the dark web there are links that will take you down any rabbit hole. A link named Pork Chop piqued my interest. When I clicked it, I was directed to an About page. It only said 6 words. We find it, we chop it. And another link that said, here's an example of what we do. I clicked it, of course. As soon as I clicked on it, the picture went to the point of view from an old school camera, with the date and time in the corner of the screen. The person behind the camera approached the man and followed him. A few minutes go by, and the man noticed what was happening. He turned around and approached the camera while yelling and screaming at the person for following him. Then all of a sudden, you see 5 huge guys dressed in black wearing a pig mask run from behind the man and drag him into the dark. The person holding the camera turns the camera to his or her face and leaves it there for about 5 to 10 minutes. That person also wore a pig mask, but all you could hear was the man screaming and sounds that I don't want to describe in the background. The camera was then turned back around and the sight that I saw was disturbing. It was something that no one would ever want to see. Some people say that they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy, but I did. After the video was over, there were links. One said pork and the other said chop. I clicked on the pork and it prompted me to put in a code. I didn't have one, so I backed out. So I clicked on chop. There was information that needed to be filled out, like name, height, description, and place. I filled out all the info for my manager. And the place, it was my job. I submitted the form. At the end of the screen, it said, see you soon. 4 days later, while at work, my manager approached me and decided to apologize for the way he treated me, and offered to give me more hours and said that he will work with me more often because he sees potential in me. A few hours later, it was close to the end of the night. My manager helped me with the trash and took it out for me. As I were putting chairs on top of the table getting ready to mop, I looked outside and saw my manager looking over at something, but he looked worried. I moved to get a better look and I saw what he was looking at. He was surrounded by 6 people in a pig mask with weapons in their hands. I ran outside as they swarmed him, except for one person. He had a camera. I forgot all about these guys, and then I put his information on the website. I ran outside as they approached him. He looked at me for help, but I ran back inside and called the police. It took them 10 minutes to get there. When I looked back outside, what I saw was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I wish I can get the image out of my head. Between the time of me initially seeing them, calling the cops, and running back outside, these guys were gone. But my manager was still there. I went to his funeral the next week. The next day I received an anonymous email that had the whole video. They were watching him this whole time he was on shift. I don't know how they got my email. I never provided any of my information. Till this day, I still feel sick because my manager was starting to be nice to me that day. I can't go back on the dark web.
This happened to me when I was around 14 years old. I was at a sort of religious class located far from our main school building. I was drawing my cartoon characters, waiting for my teacher. However, an hour had passed and he didn't come. One of my classmates went out to see what was wrong, and it turned out that our teacher didn't arrive yet, so we had to wait a bit longer. After she told us that information, we continued waiting. I started drawing again until one of my friends, Aina, suddenly pulled on my sleeve and whispered, "Something is wrong with CT." I looked at CT, who was sitting at the back with the loud group. She wasn't saying anything or laughing. Well, it was quite weird seeing her like that, because she was the one who always talked a lot in that group. And then I saw that she was holding a small piece of black cardboard and a pocket knife. Since we had an art class that day, I thought that she might have been doing her homework at first, but I froze when I glanced at her the second time. She started carving something on the cardboard, and very aggressively. I couldn't see what she was carving, but she then woke up, went outside of the classroom, and stood there staring at something. Aina poked my shoulder, signaling that I should check out CT's cardboard. So I sneakily went to her seat to grab the piece of cardboard she left on the table and went back to my seat. As soon as we flipped the cardboard over, we got goosebumps all over our bodies. Something was written on it. The words meant, "We didn't disturb them, they disturb us," in our language. Aina and I looked at each other. When I got up to return the piece of cardboard, CT was already in her seat and stared at me with a scrutinizing look on her face. I sat down and slid the piece of cardboard under my desk. All of a sudden, I had the sudden urge to know what the heck was going on. So I got up and went towards her with Aina. "Hey CT, how's it going?" I asked. But she didn't answer my question. Then I could hear Aina whispering the Lord's Prayer, and my fear alarm started buzzing again. Then Aina tried to talk to CT, but for some reason, she suddenly shuddered. And I knew the reason. CT started to mumble the exact words that she had carved onto the cardboard, but this time her voice changed. She sounded like a demon. Her voice was deeper and lower than a man's, and her eyes simultaneously started to turn white. Her mumbling was getting louder, and now she began to scream while shaking her whole body. Everybody in the class stood on their seats and watched what CT was doing with fear. Before long, CT suddenly stopped, dropped her face slowly down on the desk, and began to sleep. I quickly returned to my seat and tried to take out the cardboard, but it was not there. I searched all over the classroom, even inside of the bin, but it was gone. The next morning, I went to CT and asked her what she was doing in class yesterday, and she replied, "Oh, I was sleeping during the whole class." "You sure?" I asked again, but she said yes, nodding her head. Was my friend possessed? Could it be real? And what she told me next made my face turn white and my heart drop. "Oh yeah, while I was sleeping yesterday, I was at some church, and I saw a very beautiful stained glass window with a nun. I wonder who that nun was, though."
My name is Nikki and I'm 19 years old. This past December, I got myself a Christmas temp job working at Amazon, helping with deliveries. It gets pretty busy around that time for deliveries, obviously, because it's Christmas. Right away, I hated the guy I was helping with deliveries. His name was Frank. To describe him, he was a bit overweight, didn't shave well, and his hair was short. I didn't like him because he was very rude and seemed like he was in a bad mood all the time. And I would be in the van with him most of the time making deliveries, and it was very awkward. I tried to make conversation with him, but like I said, he was very rude, and there was no point in trying after about 2 times. I thought about quitting, to be honest, or at least be with a different delivery driver, but I didn't want to cause any trouble. I was a temp after all and needed this job. I thought Frank was really rude and socially awkward and not a nice person to be around, but I never thought he would harm me in any way. One evening after finishing deliveries, we were driving back to the Amazon warehouse, or at least that's where I thought we were going. Frank passed the turn where we always go to the warehouse. As I said before, we didn't really speak, so I wasn't about to question him. He would probably snap at me anyway. After he continued driving, the more obvious it was to me he was taking me to another place, and it wasn't the warehouse. I finally asked Frank where we were going. He didn't snap at me, surprisingly. He just said we needed to run and do a quick errand. I was looking around my surroundings, and I could see that we were around empty fields and abandoned farmhouses. At this point, it was getting dark outside. Frank then pulled up next to a tall, overgrown, and unkempt cornfield. He said to me in a very firm voice to stay exactly where I was. "Don't move." Frank then got out of the car and started walking up into the dirt road, disappearing into the dark of night. 10 minutes went by. I sat in the van by myself in the dark and had no idea where I was. My phone was in the warehouse in the locker, as we weren't allowed to have our phones during work hours, so I couldn't even go on my phone or use it as a light source. I needed to pee and couldn't hold it any longer, so I got out of the van and headed into the cornfield to do my business. After doing so, I started to walk back towards the van. In the near distance of the cornfield, I could see flashlights. 2, in fact. I found that really odd, as the whole area seemed to be abandoned. As I got closer to the van, I could hear a sort of heated argument going on between Frank and another man whose voice I couldn't recognize. I couldn't see him either. I heard the other man say, "Where is she? You said she was in the van." Frank then told the man that she was just in there, and she has to be around here somewhere. The other man said to Frank, "If we don't find her, you're a dead man." That's what those flashlights were. Those men were already out in the cornfield searching for me. I snuck off into the field, walking quickly but as quietly as I could, the whole time crying and thinking I was about to die. After walking far enough, eventually leaving the cornfield, I ran down the side of a long dirt road. I have no idea for how long, but eventually I came across an old diner which was still open, thank God, and the manager called the police for me. After this incident, I quit my job, but this wasn't the end of it. About 2 weeks after quitting my job, I got a call from my boss who employed me. He told me that I was the last one to see Frank, as no one has seen him since. Apparently there were rumors that he owed people money from gambling debts, the people you don't want to be in debt with. As much as I don't like to think about it, I'm pretty sure Frank's way of paying off his debts with those people was to hand me over to those men. And what those men had planned to do with me, I never wanted to imagine.
I'm in charge of sound editing and audio at one of the broadcasting stations, and this is what I experienced the other day. The inside of our editorial room used to get too dark and gloomy, especially at night, so there were a lot of people who said they saw ghosts there. After I joined this broadcasting station, I just laughed when I heard about it. Nah, who believes that? However, not long ago, I had to change my mind. The audio file and film would sometimes disappear every other day. Of course, I was scolded by my seniors because of it, so I worked until dawn to make up for my mistakes. The hallway in the editing room was pretty long, and there was a small warehouse inside the room on the far end of the hallway where the film was kept. Originally, only the people in charge could enter the room. However, for some reason, I kept hearing a squealing sound in the room that day. I guess someone's still working. While I was editing, I kept hearing that noise. Wondering who was inside, I got up from my seat, came out into the hallway, and opened the warehouse door slightly. And there was someone inside the room. A woman with disheveled hair was lying on the floor, attaching her stomach. She kept making grotesque sounds and crying. She was also frantically pulling out the tape from the film. The scariest part was the speed she was pulling the tape out. It didn't seem normal. It was abnormally fast, and her posture was she didn't just lie on her stomach. She didn't have a lower body. I ran away from the room screaming like crazy, and the next day I told my senior about this, and the senior who was listening quietly said this. After hearing it, I couldn't sleep at all. Maybe she was looking for the film she had appeared in. Well, let me tell you my story. I'm working as a police officer. I experienced something really incredible a while ago, but no one believed my story, so I'm here to tell you this. Not long ago, my team and I were dispatched on a mountain after receiving a report that there was a dead body there. While we were doing some research on the dead body, I went closer to it and started to check it out. It seemed like it hadn't been long since he died, and furthermore, his body's condition was really clean. I guess this man probably committed suicide. I was thinking that, but it was at that moment. Not yet. The dead man was staring at me, with his eyes slightly open, and I definitely saw him saying it based on the shape of his mouth. He's alive! I saw it! I screamed, grabbed the other cops, and shouted, but soon, I eventually got scolded by the chief, and he told me not to disturb the other cops. He also told me that the body's cardiac arrest was checked already. I soon became devastated. Did I not see it? Did I just witness something wrong? It turned out that it had been about 10 hours since he died, and the cause of his death was suicide. I started to tell another senior police officer. He listened carefully to what I was saying, and he finally said this. Well, sometimes there are people like you. You know, those types of people sometimes hear the last thing the dead wanted to say. I just heard this from someone I know. One day, he got up as usual, and then he stared at his finger with a blank expression on his face. Why don't I have 6 fingers? Why do I have 5 fingers? Where's the other one? He started to have these kinds of thoughts out of nowhere. He was so worried, and he kept thinking about it on his way to work. And he was so scared when he came back home that he burst out crying. However, he eventually realized it only before he came home and was about to fall asleep. Oh, yes. I have 5 fingers, actually. A few days later, he posted about this on an online community. Well, of course, most people treated him like a crazy person or just laughed at him. In the meantime, a comment written by one person stuck deep in his mind. The anonymous commenter said he might have early-stage schizophrenia, and he asked him, what if he thought he had 4 fingers instead of 6 eventually? I got goosebumps when I heard that.
When I was in kindergarten, I lived in an apartment house of corridor access, and there lived a family of a friend who was always playing with me in the same apartment. Me, my mom, my friend, and my friend's mother. We used to hang out with each other often. Then one early dawn, my friend's mom kept hearing an irritating sound outside the front door, so she woke up and went outside. To her surprise, there was an angel of death crawling on all 4s in the hallway in front of her eyes, just moving back and forth, on and on. And that irritating sound that she heard was the sound of his black dress being drawn to the floor. She screamed with fright, but it kept crawling slowly in front of the front door, not caring about her at all. And she eventually realized that it was a dream when she soon awoke. The next day, she, of course, got frightened and went to see the shaman lady with my mom. As soon as she told her own story, The lady said something with such a creepy, cold voice. "Your son will die soon, and there's no way to save him. You can't change the fate." She got more terrified with anger and got up from her seat hurriedly. But then the shaman said to my mom, "And your son will be safe." In the end, they had no choice but to just come back vacantly. A few days later, the four of us were on our way back from the market as usual. By the time we reached the entrance of the apartment, my friend suddenly ran into the apartment first, saying he had to pee. And I saw the fruit truck parked in the corner of the apartment parking lot, so I ran over there and started to beg my mom to buy some fruit. As she was not about to buy me fruits at all, she just persuaded me to go home quickly. However, somehow I kept wanting those fruits so badly, so I tried not to go back home, standing in front of the truck. My friend, who already just went up to his house, stuck his head out from the railing in the hallway. Then he shouted loudly, saying that the house was locked. After seeing his mom take the key out of her bag, my friend came down again right away. And as soon as he ran towards the apartment entrance, it was the very moment. He was hit by a big van suddenly that rushed from the other side. I don't remember because I didn't see the very moment clearly, but it is said that his whole body flew away with a loud crash. And of course, he died instantly on the spot. I've been thinking so far that my friend had died because his mom had dreamed of the angel of death. But my mom later told me something shuddering. "Do you remember how high the corridor railing was then? It was just as high as an adult's chest." It still gives me goosebumps when I think of the moment when he got his head out of the railing. I used to live in a small house located close to a large town. I always read the newspaper every morning when I woke up, and one day I saw the article that one man from the same town I live had been missing for almost 4 months. The guy had a large scar from his left ear, the mouth, and over to the right ear. I thought I had seen something like that in a horror movie before. After a few more months later, another man was found murdered not far away from our house. The police kept searching for the criminal. However, they could not find any evidence. I was paranoid about that incident, but soon I eventually forgot about it. About another month later, one night, I was about to sleep in my room. I was the only one who had a room downstairs at that time, and I used to sleep with my window open because I get hot often. That night, I fell asleep early. However, a loud noise from outside my window suddenly woke me up again. It sounded like someone threw a ball or something like that on the wall beside my window. My bed was right in front of the window, so between me and the window was pretty close to me. I couldn't see the outside as the black curtains were blinding the windows, but I could definitely see that there was something behind it. Suddenly, I heard a small dripping sound from the window to the floor. Being frightened, I slowly opened my cell phone and turned on the flashlight. And there was blood dripping to the floor. I immediately pulled the curtains open, and there was a knife stained with lots of blood on the windowsill. And there was someone outside. It was pretty dark so that I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could recognize those scars. It was the same man that was missing for months. He was standing there and just watching me with a blank stare. And I noticed that he had cut his scars open widely again with the knife. I quickly grabbed the knife, went to my parents' room, and showed it to my dad without saying words. Dad immediately called the cops, and they ran toward my room, but when we looked outside the window again, he was already gone. After the cops had arrived, they didn't find any trace of him. And now it's been 2 years since then. But still, nobody has found the man yet. Who was that man? And why was he doing that outside my window without doing anything harmful to me? It remains still a mystery. So, where should I begin my story? First of all, I recently got a job as an intern at a small company while attending a special high school. And from school, I had a friend who I hated most. He always spread false rumors, making my friends turn on each other, and never was sorry for what he had done wrong. Well, he was already a celebrity at that time. But this dude and I eventually got a job at the same company. Because I had the complete opposite character of him, we had a lot of fights at school. However, after I came into the company, I tried to control myself as much as I could, and understand him no matter how much he said stupid things. My friends ended up calling me Buddha. But the incident eventually happened 2 weeks after my first day of work. I can't tell you the specific details to protect the company's privacy, but his mouth was absolutely a disaster. Our school teachers had to come to the company. We both had to have a face-to-face talk with the executive director, and we even had a call from the education office. I got so angry. I couldn't bear this stupid situation anymore. I ran down to the first floor material storehouse, confirmed that there were no people, and spat out all kinds of curses calling out his name. Shit, I'm gonna blow off your head, you son of a... But it was the biggest mistake of my life. The warehouse used to be a place where people didn't come very often. But when I looked back casually, he was there. He was just staring at me. My heart was pounding, and I felt like my head all stopped. Holy crap. There was a bleak silence between us, and I could feel that awkwardness in my bones. But soon he just turned around and then went out of the warehouse. Feeling sorry, I thought he got hurt feelings, so I followed him. I called his name several times, but he never looked back and just walked down the hall. At first, I felt sorry, of course, but come to think of it, it was literally all his fault, and he had a responsibility to fix this problem. So why should I apologize to him while being ignored by him? All of a sudden, I started to be outraged at him. I stopped there and I screamed at his back. He suddenly stopped walking, and at that moment, I was like, oh shit. You know, we're still working for the same company right now, and I can't make a mess of my plans in just 2 weeks. So I apologized to him to ease the mood by calling my friend's name again. Then he turned his head slowly, and, I still can't forget that creepy memory until right this moment writing about this incident. To tell the truth, I'm about to go crazy. His neck slowly turned toward me. And you can believe it or not, his body was standing still in the same position, but only his neck slowly began to turn. A loud crunch sounded in the hallway, as if his neck bone had broken. And I just watched it, blankly. He was staring at me with his mouth closed, and his neck turned slowly and slowly. As he turned his neck, the skin around his neck began to twist. And when he finally turned around for about a turn and a half, his skin tore with a tremendous sound. The blood rose like a fountain, and his neck dropped on the floor with a loud thump. Then his head rolled towards me and stopped at the tip of my foot. Looking down, I could see his head showing with all his teeth, and he was smiling brightly at me. When I saw that horrific head like a broken tomato, all the cells in my body were screaming to get away from there as soon as possible. It was someone's footsteps that broke the silence that seemed to last forever. And only then I screamed frantically. My colleagues told me later that they could hear my voice on the second floor. Well, I can't imagine how loud it was. Anyway, I could feel someone shaking my body violently not long after. The next thing I knew, the executive director, the section chief, and everyone in the company were looking down at me with a surprised look on their face in the hallway. I was sitting on the floor before I knew it, and he was gone already. I was taken to the hospital right away that day because I spit blood on my hand while coughing. I couldn't remember how big I screamed. And while I was explaining the whole story at the hospital, I heard something incredible. One of my colleagues told me that my friend was working in his place at the time, And he was even so busy that he never came down to the warehouse on the first floor. I couldn't believe it. Eventually, I took a week off from work and got a psychiatric consultation. And 5 days have passed since then. I heard that he was dead. On the 5th day, the director came in early in the morning and opened the door of the company as usual. While he was working in the office on the 2nd floor, he heard a loud bang in the hallway. And when he went outside, he found my friend had hit his head on the marble floor, and it was all smashed. He died just like that. Later, when the director checked the CCTV at the police station, he found that my friend quietly climbed the stairs while he went into the office and closed the door. He just stared downwards for a while and jumped off. I guess the director must have been shocked. He eventually had to go to a psychiatrist for a while. When I came back to the company, there was only silence inside the company, which was unusual. Anyway, I was just playing with my cell phone while I was writing this, and I just got a call from the chief. He asked me if I came down to the 1st floor on Saturday morning while I was on my alternate work. I was working on the 2nd floor in the first place, and I couldn't go down to the 1st floor until lunchtime. So I told him I didn't. But then he said something strange. He was smoking in the outdoor parking lot that day. Then he suddenly turned his head toward the warehouse window on the 1st floor. He said that I was standing inside and staring at him quietly in the dark warehouse. He continued to say that I looked at him for a while and then disappeared. At first, he didn't want to say anything hasty, but he finally called me thinking about my friend who died a few days ago. Well, to be honest, I'm in a panic right now. I've calmed down to some extent, but I'm still scared. There's something I didn't reveal while writing earlier. I remembered it just now. When I'd seen my friend's fallen head that day, I actually saw the face coming toward me. It was neither my executive director nor the section chief. It was me. I could see my body walking toward me with only my head turned back. So, the reason I screamed was not that I saw my friend's fallen head. I screamed at myself. My parents have gone on a trip right now, so there's nobody at my house right now. Now, what should I do?
First, so I'm here to post about a dream that I've been having as of lately. I've been having the same dream, and the story is very simple. I am on my laptop at my desk, and my older sister is writing in her diary in her bed, and an extremely tall guy keeps trying to enter our room. He was literally so big that his chest touched the threshold, and I couldn't see his upper shoulder at all. My sister and I knew that he wouldn't be able to come in anyway, so we didn't care about anything and did our own things. He bumped his body trying to come in, then finally gave up a while later and went back. And at that moment, I woke up. But recently, he keeps cutting his body little by little. By the 3rd day, he hadn't been able to come in, but the day before yesterday, he was in front of the door, standing with his ankles. He cut off his foot. Of course, he couldn't come in either, and just yesterday, he cut off half of his calves. His shoulder was seen for the first time, but he has also kept bumping against the door, and this time was no different. What happens to me next if he cuts himself all the way to his knees? Second, it's me again, and I came back to post my recent experience. 2 days later, my worries became a reality. I had a dream again that day, and this time he really cut himself to his knees. I'm not going to explain all the details, but all I could see was his abnormally big mouth, and he was smiling brightly. Then I woke up. I was too scared to go back to sleep after just seeing his face. After that, I gave up on sleeping for a couple of days. I drank all night with my friends, went to a handicraft workshop run by my mom. I was playing on my cell phone for a while and napped for a while, lying down on my mom's lap when I felt too tired. Then I fell asleep, shallowly, on the sofa, and the man was there in my dream as usual. Fortunately, I was able to wake up right away because I didn't sleep deeply. However, being scared, I called my aunt, who was interested in spiritual existence at that time. When I confessed that I was having a hard time because of this, she told me that she knew a shaman and asked me to go there with her. No one believed such a thing because my family were all sincere Christians. My aunt was also a Christian, but she took me to the shaman saying that the method would be much better than just praying. Well, well, I guess these poor little lambs must have been desperate. That day, when I went to see the shaman, she said this to us just as I went inside. When my aunt asked what I should do next, the shaman said, "I'll give you an amulet. Put it on your door." Because we don't know if he was just joking around or doing it for a reason, we have to give it a few more days. Then she continued, "After I came back home with the amulet, I put it on my door without my parents knowing. I fell asleep in my room comfortably for the first time, and there was the man in my dream as I expected, but this time he wasn't standing, just sitting by the door and staring at me. I was inwardly admiring the effect of the amulets when I saw him like that. Just then, he began to imitate my dad's voice. Lord, please take care of my family and look after my lovely daughters as if they were your eyes." He said a prayer like that almost every day, and while laughing, the man just recited the exact same prayer with my dad. Tears flooded with fear, and whether he thought that it was funny to see me crying, he began to mimic the barking of my dog this time. It was just surprisingly the same. He would scratch the door and whine when I closed my door to study, and the man made the same sound, scratching his fingernails on the door. The next was the voice of my friends. The moment I heard his voice, I was so scared and creeped out. Eventually, I could wake up shortly afterwards while I was crying in my dream. I called my aunt right away, and we went back to the shaman again. And I think we have to raise our prayer to God and do some exorcism sooner or later. I have been awake since that day. Of course, I've been eating my meals normally, but I kept losing weight because of a lack of sleep. I was going crazy. I'm still terrified even when posting this right now. If anyone has experienced the same thing as me, please help me out. This is a story that my friend actually experienced. My friend had a habit of sleeping with both arms stretching over his head as if he were doing a hurrah. One day he was sleeping in that same position as usual. However, suddenly he couldn't move his body. There was a big window by his bedside, and because it was summer, he was sleeping with the windows wide open. All of a sudden, he could see a woman through the window. Her face looked kind of weird, as if she wasn't a human at all. The woman with a creepy face pulled my friend's arm violently. At that moment, he saw her mouth had almost ripped up to her ears. She gave the most horrifying loud laugh when she pulled his arm, and my friend who was struggling was soon released from his sleep paralysis. When I came to my senses, there was a thick bruise on both of my arms, with handprints, he said. I live in the countryside, and there was a pretty famous reservoir in our area. One evening, one of my father's friends drove me home in a car, and we were just passing through that area. All of a sudden, a woman softly walking into the reservoir caught my eye. I couldn't see her face, but she had black clothing covering it, and she just went into the reservoir in the blink of an eye. My dad's friend next to me also saw the figure, and at that moment, neither of us could say anything. Then he stepped on the gas like a crazy man. After arriving home, he made sure I went inside the house and even said to me to not forget to check the door before I go to bed. Not long after, the broadcasting authorities came to the reservoir with some famous celebrities to shoot some kind of TV program. And seeing those celebrities falling into the reservoir somehow made me sick. I have no idea if the person I had seen that day was a person or a ghost. But after that, there are always 4 people who die there every year. When I was young, there was an accident where one of my older sister's classmates slipped on ice while playing and died of a concussion. Her friend's name was Billy. A few years later, my mom suddenly brought up the story about Billy to my sister while we were staying at home. Hey, do you guys remember the kid who died of a concussion? Your friend, Billy? Then I heard someone abruptly knocking on our front door. The apartment where I lived had a hallway with several houses side by side, but the hallway was kind of old, so the sound of people walking around outside seemed very loud. Furthermore, there wasn't a sign of anyone that day, but someone had just knocked on my door. My mom, my sister, and I stood at the back without saying anything to each other, thinking something was wrong. The constant knocking continued, and my mom finally answered. "Who is it?" Then someone from outside said, "Is Billy here? Is Billy here? Is Billy here?" It was a woman, and she asked these 3 same questions in a very dry voice. "No, he's not here." When my mom said it like this, it became quiet outside. And when I looked through the peephole, she was already gone. I couldn't even hear the sound of footsteps. To this day, I still wonder who she was.